In the stifling heat of the Burmese jungle, where every shadow seemed to be alive and every noise could be fatal, a wounded soldier clutched a rifle that many believed to be already redundant. His hand was smashed. His uniform was soaked in blood. The enemy was closing in. And yet, as history relates, what happened next would prove to be one of the most incredible single-handed defenses of the Second World War, a moment when incredulity turned to legend. This is the story of Lachhiman Gurung, a young rifleman of the British Indian Army, who fought in the Burma Campaign of World War II. It is the story of a man who was underestimated, overlooked, and, for a fleeting moment, believed to be finished before the fight had even begun. But war has a way of proving every preconception wrong to be why 1945, the conflict in Burma had reached a desperate phase. Dense jungles, monsoon rains, and relentless ambushes defined the fighting. Japanese forces were determined to hold their ground. Allied troops, including Gurkha units from Nepal serving under British command, were equally determined to push forward. The Gurkhas were already feared and respected. Small in stature, relentless in endurance and fiercely disciplined, they had built a reputation across decades of service. Their kukri knives and steady rifle fire had become symbols of courage in some of the harshest battlefields on earth. Yet even among such hardened soldiers, Lachhiman Gurung stood out, not because he was the strongest, but because he was quietly stubborn. He was young, barely into adulthood, when he joined the army. Like many Gurkha recruits, he came from the mountains of Nepal, drawn by duty, opportunity, and tradition. Life in the regiment demanded everything: physical endurance, mental resilience, and an acceptance that death could arrive at any moment. Still, nothing could prepare them for the chaos of Burma. The jungle swallowed entire patrols. Visibility was limited to a few meters. Humidity ruined equipment. Rifles jammed. Boots rotted. And the enemy, skilled in infiltration and night assaults, could appear without warning. By May 1945, Gurung's unit had been tasked with holding a defensive position near Tongda. The objective seemed simple: hold the line, prevent Japanese forces from breaking through, and wait for reinforcements. But simple orders often mask impossible realities. Japanese tactics emphasized aggressive nighttime assaults. Waves of soldiers would advance under darkness, using grenades and close-quarters combat to overwhelm defenders. Survival depended on discipline and relentless vigilance. On the evening of May 12, tension filled the air. The jungle was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence soldiers learned to fear. Gurung and his comrades prepared their positions, checking ammunition, adjusting firing angles, whispering last instructions. No one knew the attack would fall directly on their trench. It began with the sound of movement, then a grenade. Accounts from regimental records described the explosion landing dangerously close to Gurung's position. Instinctively, he grabbed it and threw it back. Seconds later, another grenade landed. Again, he hurled it away. Then came a third. This one detonated before he could release it. The blast was devastating. It shattered bones in his right hand, tore into his arm, and knocked him back. Smoke, dirt, and blood filled the trench. For a moment, everything went silent. Nearby soldiers assumed he was dead. In many cases, he would have been. Severe hand injuries meant a rifleman was effectively out of the fight. Reloading, aiming, even holding a weapon became nearly impossible. Medical evacuation under heavy assault was unlikely. Most wounded men simply tried to survive until dawn. But what happened next defied expectation. According to official citations and later battlefield testimonies, Gurung regained consciousness, dragged himself upright, and reached for his rifle, a Lee-Enfield bolt-action weapon already worn from jungle conditions and relentless use. His right hand was nearly unusable, so he began loading and firing with his left. Japanese soldiers were already advancing, closing in on the trench, believing the blast had neutralized its defenders. The attack intensified. Gunfire echoed. Voices shouted in the darkness. And in that moment, wounded, bleeding, nearly alone, Lachhiman Gurung made a decision that would shape the rest of his life and echo through military history. He would not abandon the line. He would fight. Even if it meant doing so with a broken body and a rifle many would have considered useless in that condition. Meanwhile, the jungle erupted into chaos as wave after wave of attackers surged forward. The trench became the focal point of the assault, and what happened in the next hours would shock both sides, not just because of the resistance, but because of the sheer endurance of one man refusing to fall. And as the night deepened, the line between survival and legend began to blur. The explosion had already altered everything. Smoke still lingered in the trench. Dirt and splinters were stuck to his uniform. The pain in his arm throbbed with each beat of his heart, sharp and disorienting, but far removed from the sound that now filled the jungle, the sound of approaching footsteps, shouted orders, and the ringing of rifle fire. Night had fully fallen on the battlefield. Light was all but extinguished. The jungle absorbed all illumination, leaving only dark shapes and flashes of gunfire to betray movement. The Japanese troops, trained for fierce nighttime assaults, pushed ahead with conviction. They believed the trench had been damaged in the grenade explosion. They were mistaken. Propped against the side of the trench, Gurung steadied his Lee-Enfield rifle. His right hand, badly injured, could no longer grip or reload. So he adapted, bracing the weapon against his body, cycling the bolt and feeding rounds using his left hand alone.
It was slower, painful, difficult, but not impossible.
Every movement required concentration.
Every shot had to count.
According to official battle accounts, the assault intensified almost immediately. Japanese troops closed in, throwing grenades and probing the trench's defenses. Other defenders nearby were either wounded or forced to take cover under heavy fire, leaving sections of the position dangerously exposed. For long stretches of the night, the defense of that point fell almost entirely to one man. Meanwhile, the jungle roared with overlapping sounds, rifle fire cracking through the darkness, leaves shaking as soldiers advanced, shouted warnings, and the occasional flare briefly illuminating the chaos. In those flashes of light, attackers could be seen moving closer, sometimes only meters away. And each time they advanced, a single rifle answered. Gurung fired steadily, refusing to let the line break. His breathing slowed into a rhythm.
Aim. Fire. Reload. Adjust. Fire again.
The pain didn't disappear, it became background noise. What mattered was distance, movement, and survival. According to historical records, Japanese forces attempted repeated charges, expecting the trench to collapse under pressure. Instead, they encountered persistent resistance that seemed larger than it was. The accuracy of the rifle fire created the impression that multiple defenders remained active. But no one knew the truth in that moment. No one knew that the rifleman they faced was injured, nearly alone, and fighting through sheer determination.
Time stretched.
Minutes felt like hours. Ammunition ran low. The sounds of the jungle blended into a continuous storm of movement and gunfire. At times, attackers came so close that Gurung could hear their breathing, their equipment brushing against foliage, their commands whispered in urgency.
He did not retreat. He did not call out.
He simply continued firing. What happened next shocked both sides. Japanese troops began to hesitate. Their assault slowed, then regrouped. The trench, expected to fall quickly, remained active, dangerous, unpredictable. Each attempt to push forward met resistance that seemed impossibly persistent. From Gurung's perspective, the night blurred into a single, relentless struggle.
Sweat mixed with dirt.
His injured arm weakened. Reloading became slower. But the rifle never fell silent for long. Meanwhile, nearby Allied soldiers, still under pressure themselves, could hear the continuous firing from his position. Some believed reinforcements had arrived. Others assumed a machine gun nest had been established.
No one realized the truth until morning.
As the hours passed, the intensity of the assault began to shift. Japanese forces, having suffered heavy resistance and unable to break through quickly, started pulling back to reorganize. The jungle quieted slightly, though sporadic shots still echoed. Dawn approached slowly, and with it came the moment that would transform a desperate act of survival into a story that spread across regiments, commands, and eventually the world. Because when the light finally touched the battlefield, the scene revealed something no one had expected. Not the defenders, not the attackers, not even Gurung himself.
The trench still stood.
And the rifleman inside it was still alive. The first light of dawn filtered slowly through the jungle canopy, thin and gray, slicing through the smoke and quiet that followed the chaos of the night. For hours, the sound of gunfire had outlined the darkness. Now, there was only quiet, punctuated occasionally by movement in the distance and the muffled sound of tired soldiers checking their posts. In the trenches nearby, Allied soldiers hesitantly raised their heads. They expected to be destroyed. They expected to be wounded. What they did not expect was the trench to be intact. As visibility improved, soldiers began to move toward the position that had absorbed the heaviest assault. Reports from the night suggested it had been targeted repeatedly. Many believed no one inside could have survived. But when they reached it, they saw him,
still alive, still conscious,
rifle resting beside him. Lachhiman Gurung was slumped against the trench wall, his uniform soaked with blood and dirt, his right arm severely injured. His face was pale from exhaustion, but his eyes were alert. He had not abandoned his post. He had not allowed the line to collapse. And around the trench, the evidence of what had happened during the night became visible. Bodies lay scattered in front of the position, signs of repeated charges that had failed. Weapons, discarded equipment, and disturbed earth marked where attackers had tried to push forward. The ground told a story of persistence met by resistance that would not yield. According to official military records and later battlefield assessments, Gurung had fired continuously for hours despite his injuries, holding off multiple attacks almost single-handedly. The number of enemy casualties in front of his position was later estimated to be over 30, with several more wounded during the failed assaults. It was a defense that stunned even seasoned officers. Nearby soldiers who had heard the firing through the night now realized the truth. The steady rifle they believed belonged to a full defensive section had been operated by one wounded rifleman refusing to give up his ground. Meanwhile, medical personnel rushed to his position. His injuries were severe. The grenade blast had shattered bones in his right hand and caused extensive damage to his arm and face. Immediate evacuation was necessary. Yet even as they treated him, accounts described Gurung asking about the line. Was the position still secure?
Had the enemy broken through anywhere else?
His focus remained on the mission, not his wounds. That moment left a lasting impression on those who witnessed it. In the days that followed, reports traveled up the chain of command. Officers documented the events in detail, piecing together what had happened from testimonies, physical evidence, and Gurung's own account once he was stable enough to speak. The story spread quickly. Among Gurkha units, it became a symbol of resilience. Among British command, it was cited as one of the most determined single-soldier defenses of the Burma Campaign. For Japanese forces who had participated in the assault, it represented an unexpected and costly failure against a position they believed had been neutralized. But beyond the battlefield, the moment began to take on a larger meaning. This was not just about numbers. It was about endurance. About a soldier who, despite catastrophic injuries, refused to retreat. According to historical records, the official citation would later emphasize not only the number of attackers he held off, but the extraordinary discipline required to continue operating a bolt-action rifle under such conditions, loading, firing, and maintaining aim through hours of pain and fatigue. It was the kind of act that changed how commanders understood individual resilience in combat. And it ensured that Lachhiman Gurung's name would not remain confined to regimental logs. Because what happened that night did more than save a trench. It preserved a line.
It protected fellow soldiers.
And it demonstrated, in the harshest conditions imaginable, what determination could look like when everything else seemed lost. Yet for Gurung himself, the story was far from over. Survival came with a cost, one that would follow him long after the jungle fell silent. The evacuation from the front line was slow and difficult. The terrain of the Burma theater did not forgive the wounded. Narrow jungle paths, unstable ground, and the constant threat of renewed attack meant that every movement carried risk. Stretchers sank into mud. Medical teams worked under pressure, knowing time was critical. Lachhiman Gurung drifted in and out of awareness as he was carried away from the trench he had defended through the night. The adrenaline that had kept him fighting was fading. Pain surged in its place. His right hand was severely damaged, the bones shattered by the grenade blast. His arm and face bore injuries that would take months to heal, and some would never fully recover. Yet he had survived. Many others had not. In field hospitals behind the lines, surgeons and medics worked with limited equipment, treating wounds sustained in one of the most unforgiving environments of the war. Infection was a constant danger. Supplies were stretched. The Burma Campaign, often overshadowed by the European front, was nevertheless one of the most demanding theaters for both soldiers and medical staff. According to military medical reports from the period, injuries from grenades and close-quarters fighting were among the most difficult to treat. The fragments caused deep, irregular wounds. Recovery was slow, and in many cases, permanent disability followed. For Gurung, the path ahead would not be simple. But news of what he had done began to spread far beyond the hospital tents. Within days, officers had submitted detailed accounts of the battle. Testimonies from fellow soldiers described the continuous rifle fire, the repeated enemy assaults, and the discovery at dawn, one wounded man still defending his position. Commanders reviewed the reports carefully. Acts of bravery were common in war. Soldiers fought, endured, and sacrificed daily.
But this moment stood apart.
It was not just courage under fire, it was sustained resistance, carried out while severely injured, over hours of combat. Meanwhile, across the wider front, Allied forces were pushing forward in Burma. Japanese resistance remained fierce, but momentum was shifting. Battles were fought village by village, ridge by ridge, often in conditions that tested the limits of endurance. The defense of that trench became part of a larger story, one of persistence against a determined enemy in one of the harshest campaigns of World War II. Back in recovery, Gurung faced a different battle. His right hand would never function as it once had. The injury permanently changed his ability to handle weapons, perform routine tasks, and continue active combat service in the same way. The physical cost of a night was lasting. But those who spoke with him later noted something remarkable. He did not dwell on the pain. He did not describe himself as a hero. According to historical accounts, when asked about the night, he spoke simply. He had been ordered to hold the line, and so he did. That sense of duty reflected the values instilled in Gurkha regiments for generations. Loyalty, discipline, and quiet determination defined their reputation. Recognition was never the goal.
Survival and mission completion came first.
Still, recognition was coming. The official process for honoring acts of extraordinary bravery required documentation, verification, and approval through multiple levels of command. Witness statements were reviewed. Battlefield reports were examined. Medical records confirmed the severity of the injuries sustained during combat. It became clear that what had happened near Tongda was not just another defensive stand. It was an example of individual endurance under conditions most soldiers would not have survived. Meanwhile, the war itself was nearing its final months. Across Asia and the Pacific, major offensives were underway.
Cities fell.
Supply lines shifted. The balance of power was changing rapidly. But in the midst of global strategy and sweeping military movements, the story of one wounded rifleman remained grounded in a single night, a single trench, and a decision not to retreat. And soon, that decision would be recognized at the highest level. Not just as bravery, but as one of the most extraordinary acts of battlefield resilience recorded during the conflict. By the summer of 1945, the war in Burma was drawing to a close. Japanese forces were retreating in the face of relentless Allied advances. Villages and supply routes that had once been fiercely contested were finally being secured. Yet amid this sweeping tide of history, the story of a single man holding a trench against impossible odds had captured the imagination of those who heard it. Lachhiman Gurung, now recovering in a military hospital, received word that his actions were being officially recognized. In September of that year, after careful review of the reports, Gurung was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest award for valor in the British Empire. The citation praised not only his courage under fire but also his determination to continue fighting despite life-threatening injuries and the loss of his dominant hand. According to the citation, Gurung's single-handed defense had inflicted casualties on the enemy that would have required multiple soldiers to achieve, a testament to his extraordinary resilience. The award ceremony was understated, in line with Gurung's own character. Those who attended spoke of a man who received the honor quietly, without fanfare, embodying the Gurkha ethos of duty and humility. When asked about the night at Tongda, he reportedly said, "I was only doing my duty. The line had to hold, so I held it." But the recognition brought more than medals. It brought the attention and respect of an entire army, of comrades who understood the stakes, and of civilians back home who were learning, for the first time, about the heroism that had unfolded in the faraway jungles of Burma. His story became part of military history lessons, regimental lore, and eventually documentaries, books, and articles. Young recruits studied it as an example of courage, discipline, and determination. Veterans cited it as a reminder that one person, no matter the odds, could make a decisive difference in battle. Gurung's post-war life reflected both the hardships and the quiet joys of survival. Despite the injuries that ended his frontline service, he continued to serve in administrative and mentoring roles within the Gurkha regiments. He married, raised a family, and shared his experiences with younger generations, passing on lessons about courage, resilience, and the responsibilities of service. The once broken rifle became a symbol, displayed in museums and regimental halls, reminding all who saw it of the night when it had rewritten the expectations of what a soldier could do. Perhaps most importantly, Gurung lived to see peace return to the regions where he had fought. The jungles of Burma were no longer battlefields but reclaimed lands, communities rebuilding, families returning, and children playing where only months earlier there had been fear and chaos. For him, the memories of war were tempered by the knowledge that his actions had saved lives, preserved a strategic position, and contributed in some small way to the eventual Allied victory. In the end, the story of Lachhiman Gurung is one of human endurance, courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed in the roar of history. It reminds us that even in the darkest, most desperate moments, determination, skill, and unwavering commitment can turn despair into triumph. And so, as the sun rose over the jungles of Burma that morning, years later, retold through records, photographs, and eyewitness accounts, one man's steadfast courage continues to shine. A broken hand, a battered rifle, and a lone soldier holding his ground became an enduring symbol of hope and human resilience. Because sometimes the smallest figure in the fiercest battle can leave the largest mark on history, and in Lachhiman Gurung's case, that mark is remembered with admiration, pride, and a profound sense of victory.